right, so joining the show today is none other than Mike Mitchell, widely known as one of the best insiders in the business, covering the CFL, XFL, and USFL for over 2 decades. Mike joins us today to talk about the Big Four outdoor leagues. Mike, how are you doing this morning?
Yeah, doing well, brother. Thanks for having me on, Sam.
Absolutely. Super excited to talk to you, like I just told you off camera. So, thank you for joining me bright and early in the morning. So, let's just go ahead and dive right in. So you cover the DC Defenders, the New Jersey Generals, and the Toronto Argonauts for News Hub, and then you also cover the Jets as well. So we'll be kind of touching on all of these teams, hopefully. But I figure we'll start with the XFL, given the fact that they're the most, current season, the one that's coming up quickest. So I wanted to start with your team, the DC Defenders, and the quarterback room that Von Hutchins and Reggie Barlow have built. So why don't you kind of give us your thoughts on the guys that they've brought in so far for DC?
It's difficult in these new leagues because what you're looking at is eight like pro football expansion teams. So a lot of times what you need on these staffs is experience and connection. So Reggie Barlow, having worked with Fred Keiss, the offensive coordinator for the DC Defenders, is a big help for them. And they've been able to mold that offense with talents that fit that offensive scheme. So like Keiss, for people who don't know in the FCS, his offense has averaged over 200 yards rushing per game. It's a lot of RPO stuff. It's multiple backs. They produced NFL players, Isaiah Crowell, etc. So I like the way they built the team. I wasn't shocked. This is like against the modern era when they drafted Abram Smith out of Baylor as their first overall pick. Usually teams this day and age don't take running backs. But he was the fifth leading rusher in the nation. Abram Smith was, and so they're going to be run oriented. And as you bring it to the quarterback position, you've got three guys who are all three are mobile quarterbacks who can operate in that style. You got Jordan Tayamu. You've got, who's leading rusher in USFL amongst the quarterbacks there, was very good in that category as well in the XFL. You got Derek King, who's a tremendous runner. He broke, very talented guy. He's had, a lot of injuries in college, durability. His size is in question. But in terms of his playing style and ability as a runner, he's dynamic. He broke all of Kyler Murray's records in high school in Texas. And he was a very dynamic player in college when he got an opportunity. So he's going to be fun to watch. You got Eric Dungey. A lot of people familiar with him who followed college football. Big, strong guy, mobile, tough, excellent runner. And so, and these two guys, King and Dungey, have position flexibility because King is a former wide receiver at the University of Houston. He's that talented. He can play receiver. Dungey was tried out by NFL teams, spent time with the Giants as a tight end, the New York Giants, that is. So you've got these three quarterbacks who all have unique and dynamic skill sets, and all of them are mobile. And so it's going to be hard for Fred Keiss to not dress all three quarterbacks. I know it's going to be rare for XFL teams to do that. You don't have a need for that. But you want to have King on the field. You want to have Dungey on the field. And Tayamu, I think, is the most experienced in terms of being a passer. He had some up and down moments in the USFL last year. He led the league in passing yards, obviously, but I think what benefited him was working in Todd Haley's offense because he got to run a pro style offense. So that's going to help him. You'd have to figure he's the odds on favorite to start for the Defenders, and he should be one of the league's best quarterbacks. So that Defenders quarterback room should be fascinating to watch during the season. I think that offense is going to be fun to watch because they have a very good young offensive line, a lot of all SEC players. Von Hutchins, tip of the hat to him. He's done a tremendous job drafting there. And I think that offense is going to be versatile with the Puka Williams of the world, Jaquez Ezzard, who's a fantastic young talent from Sam Houston State, dynamic. You're going to see him in the slot, a lot of jet sweep action, all that. So I think they're going to be a fun offense to watch. And I think the key to all this is Barlow and Fred Keiss's relationship with one another. They know exactly the type of players they're looking for. And then Von Hutchins has made that work by drafting players and signing players that fit that system.
Definitely, I agree. It's very interesting how they built the quarterback room in particular, like you spoke about. A couple of these guys have positional versatility, so it'll be interesting to see if they touch the field as something other than a quarterback at times. So,
Yeah,
uh,
with a double forward pass, you can line up Teamu, King, and Dungey if you want in the game.
really,
And so I mean that could be fun having that aspect because those guys can line up anywhere. And you got to figure in the red zone package, you want to put King in there, you want to put Dungey in there. They're kind of like I hate to use the term poor man's, But King profiles as like a poor man's Kyler Murray, same size, 5'9" ish, maybe. And and Dungey profiles as like a Taysom Hill type, big, strong, tight end, right?
Hmm.
So 6'3" ish, whatever, 240 ish, 230 ish. So you have that like dynamic ability for those two guys to kind of be contrast from one another, and you'd be foolish not to use them in short yardage. So they're gonna have a lot of options. There are a lot of good options. It's gonna be interesting on February 19th when they're back with the beer snake at Audi Field against the Dragons.
Absolutely, it's going to be a very interesting kickoff weekend in general. I mean, with Vegas facing, I think it's Arlington, and then yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different games that are going to be very exciting first week of the season. I'm very interested to see that matchup between Stoops and Woodson. You know, the first time head coach and the veteran of the spring league, so it'll be very interesting.
And Arlington looks like one of the most fantastic spring pro football league staffs I've ever seen. They got head coaches all over their roster, all over their coaching roster there. You got Stoops obviously as the head there, Jonathan Hayes and Chuck Long running things together on offense, Tim Lewis and Jay Hayes running the defense. They did that with the Battlehawks back in St. Louis. And then Jonathan Himbaugh, Coach Jaime, is one of the best assistants in this space. I mean, he's won multiple Grey Cups, obviously won the original XFL championship as a player way back when with the Los Angeles Extreme. Was excellent with the Vipers a few years ago. I know their record wasn't great, but they were number one in the league in rushing offense, and that's because of his offensive line. And then we saw Coach Jaime's work with the Birmingham Stallions when they hoisted the trophy there in the USFL last year. And so they have a fantastic coaching staff. So I think they're built to be successful. And I think the Vegas odds have them as the favorite to win the XFL championship, and I don't blame them, to be honest.
Interesting, interesting. I had not gotten to the point of looking at the Vegas odds yet, but that makes sense. That makes sense. Very spring league veteran laden roster as well. So I
Yeah,
think they're going to
it's a
transition
gamble.
well.
Yeah, Sam, you're right, and it's a gamble sometimes with veteran players, but I think connections are very important in these new leagues because a lot of times these guys have never played with each other before, so it takes them time to gel. So sometimes when you have that built-in coaching staff thing with veterans on there that have already worked for these coaches, that makes it an easier transition for you to be good right out the gate, and then the Renegades already have a built-in chemistry connection between their quarterback and tight end. I mean, if you play XFL fantasy, I would say take Kyle Sloter and Sal Canella because those two were already all-stars in 2022 in the USFL with the Breakers. So they already have a built-in chemistry. So you have to figure that they're going to be good together from week one. It won't take them time to know how to play together. So that kind of thing, those things are a benefit in these kind of leagues where in the early going, things can be a little sloppy, disjointed. It can take teams time, 3, 4 weeks to gel. So we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. I mean, we saw some teams in the USFL kind of play on the continuity of the spring league before that. So I expect it to be a very big advantage for the Arlington Renegades this season. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, you've talked a lot about it off camera, is the fact that you're not all that sold on the Orlando quarterback position. So if you're Orlando and you're looking to acquire another quarterback that you maybe have a little bit more faith in, who are you targeting across the league right now?
There are a lot of free agent quarterbacks out there that are not under NFL roster that finished the NFL season on practice squads. The sexy one who I've suggested for the USFL, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the USFL, is Josh Rosen. That's somebody I'd look out for. Garrett Gilbert obviously has experience with success in the Orlando market with the AAF back with the Apollos a few years ago. He's somebody I would take a look at. I don't want to be disrespectful to DeAndre Francois or Quentin Dormady. I think both guys are extremely talented. I would, if I'm running an offense, I want Francois on the field, right? Because of his dynamic traits. We talked about that, like with Derek King, Eric Dungey, that kind of thing. But I just think, they only have two quarterbacks on the roster. I think they need an experienced hand in that locker room, somebody who has pro playing experience. Somebody who's been out there, who's gotten some reps. So they're very much it's uncertain how great those Guardian quarterbacks are going to be. They could shut me up. I rank them at XFLNewsHub.com as the worst team in the league. I know that seems foolhardy and premature to do that with these teams. It's just judging them based on rosters, right? So the Guardians can prove me wrong, go 9-1 and win the whole thing, right? And DeAndre Francois can be MVP. But I think, it's a little bit of a gamble, their quarterback room, because those guys, Francois had success, right? But it's not in a pro league style. It's not CFL, it's not the USFL, it's not even the spring league. So it's not his fault. Injuries, adversity in college kind of put him on a detour. So I like the talents. I just think they'd be more comfortable bringing in a Garrett Gilbert type, a Josh Rosen type, a Brett Hundley. These type of quarterbacks who have experience, who I'd love to see get out there. Deshaun Kaiser maybe. I don't think we're going to see Blake Bortles come out of retirement. That would be interesting in Florida. But that kind of quarterback, even if that individual doesn't start, you have that kind of insurance policy and just someone who can guide these young guys. They're gambling a little bit. The Guardian said in their quarterback room, because if you measure them up on paper in terms of resumes, they don't measure up well to the other quarterbacks in the league. Like the Sloters and the Tayamus, and even the guys who are NFL draft picks, like the Cole McDonalds in Houston. So those guys have a little bit of a different pedigree. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, Orlando right now, they only have two quarterbacks, so you taking a risk there. What if one of your quarterbacks get hurt? So I would advise them to have a third quarterback at the bare minimum. So it's likely, this isn't Madden. You can't turn injuries off. It's likely there's going to be injuries. It might even be injuries in the next few weeks. There have been XFL players have gotten injured and can't been put on reserve lists, like Jazz Ferguson with DC. Has got a hamstring injury there, so he's not going to be playing for the Defenders this year. We'll see if he plays for another XFL team. That's a story for another time. But Orlando needs to safeguard themselves at the quarterback position, and I don't have. I love to be proven wrong. That's what these leagues are great about. But I don't have a lot of faith right now in that OG room with Terrell Buckley and his boys there.
That's fair. I mean, obviously, we all say prove it. Well, this is one of those situations where DeAndre Francois needs to step in and prove it. Obviously, he was selected due to his connection with Robert Ford, the offensive coordinator that came over from the FCF with Francois. But that doesn't necessarily mean that he's the best quarterback option for them either. So definitely a lot of questions to be answered over there in Orlando. So to switch gears a little bit, we're going to move on to the New Jersey Generals and talk about DeAndre Johnson. Do you think he steps into that full-time starter role, or is it a possibility that we see another quarterback split snaps with him?
I'm really excited about seeing his potential evolution, DeAndre Johnson. Last year, he and Luis Perez were splitting quarterback duties at the beginning of the year, and then Johnson took over. And then it wasn't until Johnson's injury that Perez came in, did a tremendous job, and they really didn't risk playing DeAndre Johnson very much, even though he was on the sidelines dressed. Perez took things over. They went 9-1. They got to, unfortunately they lost to the Stars there, but that's like part of the Generals' history is losing to the Stars in the playoffs. Anybody's followed that many moons ago. But as far as DeAndre Johnson goes, I'm excited to see if he can take the next step as a pocket passer and if he can deliver in that aspect. He's a dynamic talent, highlight waiting to happen. With a lot of these mobile quarterbacks, you worry about their durability, whether they can stay healthy or not. They have a good veteran in their quarterback room in Kyle Laletta, so they can always lean on a two quarterback system. It's something Mike Riley did in the AAF with San Antonio. He did I wouldn't be surprised if he does that with someone like a Kyle Laletta. Maybe the Generals can add another quarterback. They're not stopping in terms of adding good players. They got over 70 players right now. They're adding NFL veterans in the last few days, so good for them. But quarterback is a position to watch closely. They need a little bit of insurance because Johnson has to prove that he can stay durable and not get hurt. But I'm excited about him because I think he can evolve. So I wonder what he did in the offseason to get ready, who he was training with, if he's working on his mechanics. I think he's the type of player who can be an MVP type. He just needs to evolve as a passer and stay healthy. So Generals are going to be a run-heavy team. The offensive coordinator, Stephen Smith, excellent offensive line coach. He works well with Riley. They have history together. They did such a great job. They dominated teams last year up front. So they need to take that next step as a passing offense, and the key is going to be Johnson. Because no disrespect to Kyle Laletta, who I think would do a fine job if he's thrown into the mix, but I think Johnson has a higher ceiling. So I want to see if he can reach it.
I would completely agree with that assessment. I mean, Johnson was super exciting to watch last year. In fact, I was campaigning for him to take over basically from day one. The moment I saw him on the field, he was just so exciting to watch. I mean, Luis Perez is a great quarterback, extremely efficient, but we've touched on his physical limitations multiple times over. So, there's a little bit of a question of arm strength there. And DeAndre Johnson, I just don't think you have that question. But as you spoke about, Kyle Aletta is still there. So, definitely could lean on a veteran for sure. So they have or had at the time of me writing these questions 70 players on the roster. With that being said, we're supposed to have a draft at some point for the USFL. I've got no information. Maybe you've got a little bit more information than I do. What are some areas that you would look at for the Generals as a position of need?
I think wide receiver. Anytime you lose a guy, I mean, how fantastic is Cavante Turpin? Anytime you lose a league MVP, who becomes an NFL Pro Bowler, voted on by the NFLPA as a first team player, so he got respect from his peers there. I think they could use a receiver. They lost Turpin. They lost Darius Shepard, who's really coming on for the Generals at the end of the year. They added Demorne Pearsonell. I think they need to be on the lookout for a dynamic receiver. Easier said than done. Turpins don't grow on trees. The only reason why he was not an NFL player is because of the issues he had domestic violence wise in college. They got him kicked off at TCU. So those 4.240 guys are not easy to find, but they do need. I think they do need like a pass catcher who can be their number one guy. And that would be an area that I would look at. Look at the available free agents. Look to bring in somebody like that. um, as far as the Generals go, they lost some key players in their secondary. Devontae Bosby went to the XFL. They lost Dejon Neal, who's with the DC Defenders. So they've done a good job in the offseason of adding players. I like USC's Iman Marshall, who's with the Ravens. They just added Blake Countess, which I think is going to be great for their locker room. The Generals are not opposed to having veterans in their locker room. They have Trey Williams last year, in the running back room. He did a great job. So they, I think those are areas the Generals can look into their secondary a little bit, maybe add another corner, wide receivers a position they could look towards for sure. Offensive line, I think they have a lot of faith in Ashley, Calvin Ashley, and Isaiah Battle, who are two experienced guys who have playing time in the USFL, and Battle had playing time in the XFL back with Riley with the Dragons before Riley left Seattle. But I think they can look towards their offensive line. They lost Garrett McGinn, who was excellent, first team All USFL player, ended up in the XFL with the Arlington Renegades. So maybe another lineman, but a wide receiver is a position because I know the Generals are going to be able to run the ball. Smith is a very good offensive coordinator when it comes to emphasizing that. And Riley's very old school when it comes to that. They could use a dynamic receiver. Easier said than done finding those guys, but you got to try anyway to unearth a Turpin type.
I believe his name's Warren Newman. You can correct me on that. Is that a guy that you see filling that role?
Maybe it's hard to say. There's a lot of good receivers that they have on the roster that are talented, but and that have upside. But I think they need to look if we're doing a draft here. When these USFL teams are over 70 players, when the season starts, you're going to get down to 50. So you're going to have a lot of players that are going to get cut by USFL teams. So when we're looking at the Generals roster, I'm not saying Newman's not going to make it, but when you're looking at the Generals roster, you have to like figure that 20 of these guys are not going to be here. So, and if they go ahead and have a draft and add 5 or 10 guys, that makes it even wider list, even longer list of players that are going to be released, right? So I think they need to at USFL teams at this point. Add-ons are always good. You never know who will emerge. They need to start looking at premium types. You need to start looking at to add because I'm not saying that these guys are just extra bodies at this point because there's so many guys out there that can emerge and be stars that are not being looked at, that are overlooked. That's why it makes these leagues great. But I think the USFL teams, a lot of them have solid foundations already. So it's about like, good systems in place, all that. They have a lot of returning starters from 2022. That's what's awesome about the USFL. This like we haven't seen this in a long time in off season where you have like a second year where you can retool your roster. That's awesome for an alt league. So, but I think a lot of these USFL teams need to look towards. We saw the Maulers sign like a Reuben Foster. That's a huge signing. So you got to look towards that type of player. The guy who's like just outside the NFL is maybe a veteran who's unsure if he wants to continue his career. Maybe he's a little frustrated that NFL window's closing on him. That's what's happened with Foster, So and that's why he's making the great career choice of playing in the USFL. Something I want Josh Rosen to do. I think teams like the Generals need to look towards those kind of talents, like the guys who can be a difference maker. Riley wants to win a championship. They came, he's done that in other leagues. He's done that in the CFL. He wants to win a championship in this league. So I think they have to start looking at maybe a premium quarterback if they want to hedge their bets on DeAndre Johnson. But I think a wide receiver, someone who has a little bit of NFL experience, that maybe has gotten a little bit of a raw deal in the NFL. Like, I'll just throw this out there. This would be fun, right? Um, Tavon Austin. Like, I don't know if he'd play in the USFL, but like for me, why not, right? And I think Austin could be a Turpin type. I know he's a little bit older. He's like a cult. There are so many fans out there that love Tavon Austin, loved him in college, expected more out of him in the NFL. He's had a good NFL career, but people expected him to be a game breaker, right? So like maybe even a Hall of Famer, right? I think somebody like that, you insert that into the Generals offense and use him in the Turpin role. If he's motivated, I think that could be a fun player. That's what John Ross was another guy I was looking towards playing spring ball in either the XFL. I suggested him for the Defenders or the USFL, right? Because Ross has signed a futures deal with the Kansas City Chiefs. But players like that, who are like top of the line talents, but maybe it hasn't quite worked out for them in the NFL. You'd love to see them try to redeem themselves or write a new chapter in their careers, change the narrative a little bit. So that's a kind of player that I wouldn't mind. There's like a Laquan Treadwell, I believe. I don't know if he's linked up with an NFL roster. There are players like that fascinate me, that are still young, that didn't quite live up to their NFL potential, that could draw in eyeballs. I think people would watch Tavon Austin on the Generals. I'm glad I brought that up. That's the kind of that. Those are the kind of guys I think that teams. When you have 70 plus players, you need to start. You can have many add-ons. Like the Generals can also use a kicker. No disrespect to who they currently have on the roster. Brock Miller's fantastic. That was a great re-signing by New Jersey. But they really last year that was their weakness on special teams, their kicking game. So I think they need to be on the lookout. I don't know if they have an interest in a Ty Rouser or what have you, but I think they need to look at players, maybe get a better veteran kicker. They had a lot of uncertainty at that position. So that's the kind of, you have to start thinking big at this point if you're USFL teams, not on the smaller variety. Let's just add on a few guys, see what happens. That's cool too. But I think a lot of these USFL teams need to start thinking like, how can we win a championship? How can we be how can we step up our game? And those are some areas I think the Generals can do that.
I definitely agree. So, got kind of an interesting question for you. So, obviously, during the COVID year in 2020 in the NFL, we saw a lot of changes with the practice squad. We can see veteran players on the practice squad, a lot more players on the practice squad. Do you think this has affected who ultimately ended up in these spring leagues?
I think so for sure, and I noticed it. And I don't have the data in front of me, but the XFL got a lot of players that were unfortunately gotten to an issue in college where their senior seasons were canceled because of COVID or limited. So they ended up, a lot of those guys didn't get a fair break in the NFL draft process because they didn't get a chance to play because of COVID. So I do think, they expanded the practice squad, which is awesome. They're allowing veteran players to be on there. In the past, that, once you got past a certain point in your career, you weren't allowed to be on practice squad. But now you see veterans all the time, the Josh Johnsons, the Brett Hundleys, all these guys end up on practice squads during an entire season. I do think COVID played a factor. It played a factor in college football because guys got limited tape or didn't get a chance to play. Ended up transferring, maybe not getting playing time the way they expected. It stopped their momentum. And I do think it's opened the door for these leagues to obtain talents that maybe you'll find out should have been in the NFL or would have been draft picks or would have been priority guys that kind of fell by the wayside. It's so easy in college football to have a great college career and then become anonymous in the pros. Less than 2% of all college football players, draft eligible college football players, make the National Football League. So you've got a lot of players, thousands of players that kind of like looking for work and opportunity. So I do think the XFL and the USFL. I know the XFL's got a couple players they just recently added that are NFL draft eligible. I don't know in 2023. I don't know if these players are going to have the impact that Kenny Robinson had, who ended up being drafted by the Carolina Panthers, which was a really cool thing, having an XFL player drafted by an NFL team. But that window should open up in the future too, as these leagues become more viable. I think that's the USFL is building momentum where they're going to have more veteran players and more young players in college that are going to be interested in them. And the XFL, if they prove themselves, they're also going to open up that doorway for themselves. You'll see more and more young guys who are in college who are kind of on the fringe who go, you know what, let me go get playing time in these leagues because they're viable. This is real quality pro football, and they're on major networks. So I mean, so you get plenty of exposure there. So COVID definitely played a factor. The landscape has changed with NILs and everything. College players getting paid, which is cool. But I do think these leagues have a lot of different avenues to obtain quality players.
I would completely agree, but yeah, you touched on that briefly, but NIL has also affected this whole situation as well. You know, some of these players are opting to stay in college rather than come out into the draft because they don't know where they're going to go, and rather than take their chances in spring ball, they stay in school, use up all their eligibility, and at the same time make some money on the side. So definitely hard to argue that. So we're gonna again change gears a little bit to the defensive side of the ball with the Generals. Obviously, they lost Chris Dishman to the XFL this offseason. So who do you believe is in line to take over that defensive coordinator position?
A lot of these coaching staffs have like a committee approach. Like last year, the Generals didn't have a natural special teams coordinator. So the favorite right now, unless Mike Riley reaches into his Rolodex, if he still uses one, who knows, he's old school, is Robert Diaco, Bob Diaco, the former UConn coach. He was their defensive line coach last year. He contributed. It was interesting with the Generals. What they did was they divvied up the special teams duty. So one assistant coach would do the upfront work in terms of rushing the punt, blocking. The other would do the return aspect of it. And then so they were split up in the coverage units, the kicking units. So I would assume that the and I reached out this week to the USFL to the Generals, and they didn't have a definitive word on that. But for a long time now, my assumption was that Diaco was going to be their defensive coordinator to take over for Chris Dishman. We'll see. Maybe they reach outside there. I got to give credit to these coaches, and it's not like the NFL or college football where you got a staff of like 25 assistants. A lot of these teams, they have maybe 10, 12, maybe pushing it, and they ask these coaches to assume a lot of duties. Like Coach Jaime and with Arlington with the Renegades is going to be doing special teams too, but he's coached tight ends as well, so I'm pretty sure that he'll be in that tight end room. So you'll see that with the Generals too. But it would be nice if they added someone, to do the play calling. Though I don't doubt that Diaco will do a good job. He's got experience, obviously, on the defensive end. So perhaps they have a lot of good talent with the Generals. So Toby Johnson, good veterans there. Shalom Luwani, so I think, Drayvon Askew, Henry's a very good player, has been for a long time. So we'll see how they handle that. But right now it's Diaco from what I've heard. We'll see.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, he makes a lot of sense for that position. And with the loss of Dominique Franks and Chris Dishman, it'll be interesting to see how they ultimately try to fill that defensive backs coach role as well. So, I mean, that was one of the big things that I thought was interesting this offseason. I expected some coaches to jump, but I didn't expect 10. I mean, that was a large number to me.
Yeah, it was. I had a feeling it would happen, only because a lot of these coaches that did jump were a part of the XFL already. They liked that experience. They liked operating that time of the year. So when you had like someone like a Tim Lewis, or you have someone like a Chris Dishman who coached with the Guardians, Jonathan Heimbach who coached with Tampa, I expected some of that because time of the year, the experience they had prior 3 years ago. Dishman, I knew for a long time was leaving the Generals while he was coaching with the team. That's something I had to keep under wraps for a long time. I think I might have, in our social circle, might have tipped you guys off to that, but I didn't go public with that because I didn't want to disrespect the situation. But yeah, I expected some of these guys to do. We saw with that's what the great thing is about these leagues is now players have options. A Channing Stribling can look at, hey, should I go play for the Battlehawks? That'd be cool to play in St. Louis. But you know what? I really love my time with the Stars, and and that these guys have options now. There's 16 pro teams with coaching staffs, players. So I think that's great. That these coaches have that option. Hey, they look at a situation. Hey, I don't mind living in Texas for a few months. I love Texas, and tax breaks are not bad. So hey, I'll set up shop and be in Texas, and it'd be cool. What the XFL has over the USFL right now is the fact that they're actually going to have home and away games. I know the USFL's taking a step forward, and that's a positive step that they're going to have at least 3 teams this year. Different locations is cool. They're going to have 3 teams actually have home games. But the XFL has that more of a traditional feel with a football league where you actually have home and away games. Imagine if the Eagles played. I mean, they can do it. Imagine if the Eagles played in MetLife. I mean, uh, Eagles fans would go. At least that's close. But imagine if the Eagles played where the Falcons play in Atlanta. It wouldn't feel like a real Philly team if they were based in Atlanta. So until these teams in the USFL actually set roots in their cities, you see the comment section. If you go to Stars stuff and social media, you go to the general stuff, people are like very negative about it. As cool as it is that they're going to be in Canton, I love Canton, Ohio. People are very negative about that. So I think that's one of the timeline in the XFL is an advantage for a lot of these coaches, a lot of these players, is why people chose them. And I think there's no question about it. The natural feel, a fully fledged football league with home and away games, the actual that kind of rather than being in a full on hub. I know that's evolving now for the USFL, which is awesome, like I said. But I think those were two things that were like factors for these coaches and players.
Absolutely. While you did mention that it's kind of evolving with the USFL, a lot of that information wasn't set until a couple days ago. So a lot of these players are making decisions based on what they knew. In 2022, the USFL was strictly in Birmingham, so that's how they were looking at the situation.
Back in November, a lot of these coaches and players did know about the Detroit hub. Players told me, and I went on social media, kind of just mentioned it in passing. Like I've written about it for a long time that they were going to advance to year two. They wanted to be in more hubs. Like they wanted to be in Pennsylvania for the Stars, and that didn't quite work out. And so that would have been cool. Yeah, your Pittsburgh Maulers, it's cool they're going to black and gold, black and yellow, however you want to put that, yellow gold. But it's cool that they've gone to that. But until you're actually in Pittsburgh, those fans are not going to fully embrace it. You'll get some Pittsburgh fans, but if you look at the ratings last year, which I released were both NBC and NBC, the top 10 market, these markets weren't really watching. Tampa Bay Bandits, Florida's a good market and all that. Tampa's actually one of the top TV markets. They didn't really care that much about the Bandits. Unless you're actually there, they're not going to care. So tipping your hat to Pittsburgh by going to black and gold, awesome. Not being there, kind of like it's not. If they'll get there, hopefully, that's the hope, right? In a year from now, that all these teams are in their markets by year three. That's what happens. New Jersey's not going to embrace the Generals. I'm embracing the Generals because I'm an OG USFL fan who was a Generals fan. The reason I have a love for these leagues is because I was a Herschel Walker, Doug Flutie guy with the Generals. The Generals and the New York Jets are my two teams. But a lot of not everybody's my age. So, and a lot of these current USFL fans weren't around for the craziness of Trump and everything else that went on many moons ago. So, so I think they need to get to their markets. But to your point, a lot of these coaches and players knew that they weren't like, okay, for example, right? The Breakers head coach Fedora, at the end of the USFL season, he talked about how all these teams are going to be in their markets. And then he cited family reasons as to why he wasn't returning to the USFL. But then very shortly after that, he mentioned that if they were in New Orleans, that he would have considered staying if they actually were going to be in New Orleans. And obviously they're not going to be in New Orleans, at least this year. So that was like one of the reasons. So coaches and players knew where they were headed. The USFL, this was their goal, to their ultimate goal is to sell off these franchises to owners. Now maybe that's where they're headed. Now maybe you'll be in Michigan and they'll lure in some big money guys in the Michigan area with Detroit, with the Panthers. That would be cool. And so maybe that happens for these teams. We'll see maybe the Showboats in Memphis that happens. So that's the ultimate goal. Year one for the USFL was almost like an infomercial. It's like selling these leagues to prospective owners and to prospective cities. And so we'll see. I mean, they're evolving. They're taking the next step in that realm. And the ultimate goal is to have these teams all in their markets and to not go overboard in finances. So if you can rope in owners and people who can make commitments and actually take care of payroll and every marketing and everything else you have to do, a promotion, then that will help the league grow. That's why they didn't go into cities in year one, because they knew that would be extremely costly and expensive and they wouldn't be able to handle it. So that's why we're kind of baby steps approach financially to making that work. So I think a lot of these coaches and players that chose the XFL already knew. They already knew the union was going to, the United Steel Workers Association, UFPA, was going to help out with salaries and raise them up. They already knew that these teams were going to additional hubs. They just chose timeline, and I think the league feel, actually being in home and road games, all that. That's like more of a traditional league than rather than just being in hubs. Some guys love being in Birmingham, some guys didn't. Um, so that's kind of the story there.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, I was not aware of the fact that. I mean, when I was aware of the fact that Larry Fedora had mentioned that, but timeline wise, I guess I hadn't considered that.
Yeah, it was kind of like I know he cited family reasons, but right after that, very shortly after that, he said, if they were in New Orleans, it'd be a different story. If we were in our actual market, he got the tip off that they weren't going to be in Louisiana, that they weren't going to be set up there, so he went on his way. And I think that's a big reason some of these coaches, like, it's where they want to keep their family, where they want to be for a certain time of the year. Those are big factors in all this. Location's huge.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of these guys are away from their families to go play or coach or play in these spring leagues, and they don't, the families don't travel with them, so that's a huge consideration. If you know you're going to be in Houston, and you live near there, that might be a better option for you for sure. So I want to talk about one player in particular that was drafted by the XFL but opted to return to the Generals, and that's Terry Poole. Obviously, Terry Poole's a spring league veteran. How encouraged are you as a Generals fan to see a man like Terry Poole return?
That was a big signing because after they lost Garrett McGinn, losing Poole, another first team All USFL player, that would have been difficult. And I know Steven Smith's a good coach and Riley's excellent, and their system is conducive to producing, but losing Poole would have been bad for them. Yeah, I think it worked out, for the Generals immensely because Poole is a guy who was fantastic last year for them, and he's been one of the very best offensive linemen in these leagues. Pro Football Focus had Terry Poole ranked as, I believe, a top three player in the AF and a top three player in the XFL in 2020. He was protecting the blind side of PJ Walker for the undefeated Houston Roughnecks in 2020. And the two players that were graded ahead of Terry Poole in the XFL been in the NFL for the last 4 years, last three NFL seasons, and Michael Dunn with the Browns and Storm Norton with the Chargers. So that just goes to show you like the quality of Poole's play. His whole career, former NFL draft pick with the Seahawks, his whole career he's been labeled as a pass protector, like maybe not so great in the run game. So I think he evolved last year. I think with the Generals, you saw them play a smash mouth style, and you saw him round out his game. He didn't work out for him for whatever crazy reason with the Toronto Argonauts. That's the Argos usually hit on those American players. They've done a tremendous job with that. And so with Poole, for whatever reason, personality conflicts, who knows, coaching staff, didn't work out in the CFL there. That was to the benefit of the USFL. And Poole had an option whether or not to stay with the Generals, where he's comfortable working in that scheme and working in staying with Riley, or going back to the XFL. I thought what was interesting with Poole was he didn't end up with coaches he was familiar with. I think if he would have ended up with June Jones in that offense, then maybe that would have given him a little bit more thought to whether or not he would go back to the USFL. So, yeah, I think it was a great move for the Generals, and I think it's a great. They needed him. These leagues is very important. The quality of play in the offensive line is very important to have veterans on your team. And so Poole's getting a little bit up there in age, and you want quality guys like that because they help the younger players, the inexperienced guys, learn what it's like to be a pro. And Poole's a pro's pro, so that was great for the Generals.
Definitely agree on that one. So Cavante Turpin, I mean, obviously we've all talked about him. We've all seen what he's able to do. He's been unbelievable. I think at this point he's played almost 30 games, or right at 30 games, over 2,500 yards, or right around there. Talk to me about the future success of the USFL due to a guy like Cavante Turpin. I mean, I feel like he's opened some major doors for future USFL players.
It's a major selling point. It's like this guy played in our league, and now look at him, right? And look at this can happen to you. So that's no better advertising tool. Like every 5 seconds, the USFL should be hyping up Turpin every which way but loose, right? Because that's how you sell. That people go, wow, the USFL has good players. Wow, look at this guy. Not only did he make it into the league, but he's a star. He's already a superstar. So I saw that coming because anybody who watched USFL last year knew that was happening. But anybody who didn't watch USFL and they see this guy, they go, "Holy cow!" They go, wow, they got some good players there, and there's a lot more Turpin types out there. The impressive thing about Cavante Turpin is he's 155 pounds, maybe, right? And so he's lasted, like you said, 30 games. Now, I don't know if that would have happened if, guys, I selfishly wanted Dallas to use him every week on offense. I think he had less than 10 touches the whole year on offense, which not the way I would have used him, right? But like he wasn't used the way he was quite used in the USFL with the Generals, where they had him running the ball, they had him catching the ball left and right. I think he had the second most targets in the entire league, as far as a pass receiver goes. So at his size, I had my fingers crossed. I had my worries. 150. There are not too many guys. If you look around the NFL, there are not too many guys that are 155 pounds. So I was a little worried about him holding up. So he did a great job. And maybe if they'd used him more on offense, he got more touches. He got digged up quite a bit too. He had some nicks and bruises during the year. He gets some big hits because he's a smaller guy too. So even in the playoff game recently, he almost nearly got knocked out against the Niners there. So shouldn't have been tackled by Robbie Gold. But anyhow, but that's what happens, right? But anyhow, but yeah, the success of Turpin, I think, is huge for the USFL. It's a selling point. It just basically it's advertising for players. It's for agents to reconsider the USFL. It's for young players. It's for veteran players to go, yeah, you know what, that league has good talent, man. Look at this. I can do that. I can go be a superstar in that league and then go to the NFL and get a shot. And maybe I could be a star again. Reuben Foster's taking a chance. The NFL, that window, that door closes on you fast. Reuben Foster, highly touted, big time college player, first round pick, gets injured. And let's face it, he wasn't a superstar in the NFL. And teams, maybe there were some issues there with his character. Maybe teams don't want to take a chance on him. And so he's washed out. He ran out of NFL options. So he could have just hung up his cleats there and said, no, this is not for me anymore. Or he can give it a shot in USFL and prove that, hey, I can be the player I was before I got hurt, before I had all my issues. So Foster probably figures I can walk in and dominate. Hopefully he does. I mean, it'll be fun. But and be a star again, be a superstar again. But it's even if it doesn't happen for him, which I think it can. But even if it doesn't happen for him, it's better to try that than to just quit. So that's how I feel like on that front. So Turpin has definitely opened the door for veterans, young players, coaches, agents, everybody, fans too. Like, hey, maybe I'll get the USFL shot. Maybe I'll watch it a little bit next year, a little more than I did, because they got guys like us. They got the hardcore people who love football, every aspect of it. Their goal, these leagues' goal, is to attract the mainstream football fans, to get the mainstream football fans to respect these leagues and not think it's just a bunch of nobodies and cast offs that can't play.
Absolutely, and I think both leagues made major strides in that direction. We got multiple first and second round picks in the USFL, some recognizable names like Alex Collins, who wasn't, a big name draft pick, but he's a guy who had some time in the NFL, it's a recognizable name. And then over in the XFL, we got guys like Martavis Bryant, Josh Gordon, Vic Beasley. I mean, these are the names that casual fans are going to recognize, not necessarily, like you said, the guys like us that are out there, watching these leagues, whether they live or die. It's definitely encouraging to me to see more players like that considering these leagues.
And these players that have name recognition, they rope in fans. But what ends up happening is, like, for example, like in 2020 with Houston, a lot of people knew who Sammy Coates was. So they're watching the Roughneck games to watch Sammy Coates, and then all of a sudden they see PJ Walker break out, they see Cam Phillips break out, and they go, "Wow, Cam Phillips, man! You know what? He broke all the records at Virginia Tech. Why am I surprised that he's good?" So, and then obviously Cam Phillips led all wide receivers in receiving yards in the Grey Cup. He's become a fixture with the Argonauts, so I'm not surprised he's good, right? But that's just the way it goes. But I think sometimes these big name guys like the Vic Beasleys, you might watch the XFL to see Martavis Bryant, and they go, "Holy cow, look at this Lucky Jackson kid," or whoever it is, some young receiver that really they get you to watch, they get the eyeballs, and then you go, "Wow, look at this." There might be 20 receivers that are, no disrespect to Josh Gordon, it's awesome that he's playing the league. He might light it up with the Seattle Sea Dragons with June Jones. I wouldn't be surprised. But you might watch the league just to see Josh Gordon. There might be 20 receivers better than him in the league. A bunch of young guys that you never heard of before, or some guys you might have heard of and you forgot about. So that's the fun thing about these named players getting involved in the league, is they can actually lure in other people and they can get you to watch the other players who are young guys who just haven't had the shot. So that's cool.
I love how you put that, and that's one of the things that I've talked about the FCF a lot about. If they have this great mixture of NFL recognizable names and guys nobody has ever heard of, like an Andrew Jamil that's in the XFL now, and that's helped highlight these players. So I think the XFL and the USFL are going to also have that benefit long term as well.
No
So
doubt.
it'll definitely be fun to watch. So I've got a fan question for you that I thought was kind of interesting, and feel free to giggle a little when I ask it. But can you see a scenario in which the USFL and XFL ever come together to partnership for any sort of championship game or merger?
I hope so. I really like the football fan in me would love to see it. I don't know if you can make that work business wise with these two groups, but if you could somehow, a championship game would be weird because their seasons are situated differently. So it might be a little difficult to take the XFL team that won a championship in May and pit them off against the USFL team that won a championship in July, because a lot of those players might already be in the NFL or might be gone. You might not have the same guys, by the time you get to July if you're waiting for the champion. I'm all for it though. But the dream is that some way these two leagues could merge or work together. I mean, if you had this kind of like 16 team, and I mean, they can add more teams as we go along here, but if you had like this 16 team conglomerate that's on Fox, which is kind of like what the XFL was, but that's on Fox and ABC and ESPN and NBC and all these networks. And then you got the crossovers of the Stallions playing the Roughnecks or, back and forth and all that. So maybe in the future, I don't know if how those relationships will be. I know I've heard Danny Garcia say some positive things about the USFL. I heard uh, coaches that are obviously involved in the XFL. They were respectful of the USFL, the players, the talent that was there. It was good football, right? So maybe in the future, this is something that I hope for when the Alliance of American Football was in existence. That maybe down the road, the AF and the XFL would merge and pool their resources together. And that's the big thing with these leagues, right? When you have only 8 teams, it's a good thing for finances. But the problem with it is that you only have 8 specific markets that are interested in watching your league. So that skews the ratings a little bit. It's not like the NFL where you got 32 markets that are interested. An Eagles fan will watch a Steelers game, or Eagles fan will watch a Bengals game, whatever. Um, you only have 8 markets, so you need those 8 markets invested. So if you can get to 16 quicker by merging, now you got 16 markets that are interested in your league. That's more gambling. That's more fantasy, right? So that's more markets that are watching your games. It's one of the reasons why the NFL is so huge and does so well in the ratings is every market. And no matter, I watch, I'm a nut, I know, but I watch a Cardinals Bengals game at 3 o'clock in the morning. So if I have Matt Prater on my fantasy team, I'll watch it. I'm not a gambling type, but there's a lot of gambling people out there that'll watch with their parlays and prop bets and all that. So I think that's one benefit to going big, to have 16 teams or more, 20 teams, is that you get actually 20 markets maybe that are all into your league at once, and then you get a lot of fantasy players, gamblers, and it makes your league look bigger. So maybe in the future, I'm hoping. I know the USFL already in their commercials. I don't blame them. It's part of the business. Already taking subliminal digs at the XFL. I heard Hollywood knockoff league. I laughed when I heard that. And there was a few other different things, right? So that were in there. Don't accept no substitutes, right? The USFL commercials on Fox and in the NFL playoffs. So I hope that like somewhere down the road, I know there's a lot of tribalism in this world, especially in this crazy alt league universe. But I would love to see the two leagues uh, some point merge. I think that would be awesome. Even if they did my champion plays your champion, we're going to play the season at the same time or something like that. Interconference games, um, something. It would be cool. It would be cool to see them work together. They have to make that work financially. Who's paying the bills for who, right? So I mean, maybe you could do Fox. You take care of the bills on the USFL side. Redbird and Danny and Dwayne. You handle everything on the XFL side. Both these leagues are trying to pool in, rope in investors. So I mean, Redbird has experience with that. Fox is trying to do that. They hired an investment firm to try to help them out to get people. Because the reason why they're doing that is because they understand that the expenses are going to grow. So for these leagues, if you move into markets, if you do all this stuff, eventually player salaries are going to go up little by little. So that's kind of the way it works there. But yeah, one day, hopefully, I hope so. Hopefully, these leagues prove themselves to be viable. They're around 2, 3 years and beyond, and then they can kind of get to the table together and say, hey, why not? Let's do this together.
It would be very interesting, and I think it would make for a better case for investors for sure. But I
They have
don't
sim-
know
they have.
what
I'm
it
sorry
would
to
be.
interrupt you, Sam. I'm sorry to
You're
interrupt
good.
you, Sam. They have similar rules too, right? Because the USFL used a lot of the XFL rules from 2020, so they wouldn't
That's
have to
true.
change that much. Obviously, they're both outdoor, 100 yards, all that, same end zone. So they wouldn't have to change their leagues too much if they merge. It's fun to think about, but it's like for down the road, I think, more than anything else.
100%. Like you said, the logistics of the championship game would be very odd just based on the timing of the two leagues. Now, if they ran concurrently, yeah, it would make a lot of sense. So, yeah, that is the one big hurdle. But other than that, I would love to see it as well. But
It'd be fun.
maybe someday. So let's go north of the border and let's talk some Toronto Argonauts. Obviously, you've covered the Argonauts for a while. How excited are you given the fact that they just won the Grey Cup against a team that was on the verge of becoming a dynasty? Quite
Yeah,
honestly.
yeah, that was an amazing Grey Cup, and that final sequence at the end of that game was crazy. It appeared like the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were going to eventually find a way to win at the end. And the Argos are a very good team. I mean, they've been that for the last 2 years. And it was great that they were on that stage and they were able to prove that they could stand toe to toe with a great organization like the Blue Bombers run by Mike O'Shea. That was a fun end to the season, exciting. Maybe not so much fun if you're a Bombers enthusiast, the way that game ended, but that was, if you're a CFL fan, that was a great way to end the 2022 season. The Argos have done a tremendous job. They're run so well. They have a great young coaching staff with Corey Mace and Ryan Dinwiddie's done a great job his first 2 years in that job. Michael Pinball Clemens is CFL royalty. He's a championship. He's been a championship coach, championship player, obviously one of the all-time greats in that league. Championship executive. He's won Grey Cups in every manner that I just mentioned. And he's a championship person, so he's like the perfect guy to lead that organization, but it kind of goes under the radar how good their front office is. The guy that Vince Magri is one of the very best former Canadian offensive linemen. Um, he's does such a great job, not just with Canadian talent. We saw the team re-sign Robbie Smith, who a Grey Cup hero there, but they also have Curly Gittens Jr., who's about to be paid one of the highest paid CFL receivers. Those are two draft picks by the Argos Canadian players who turned out to be stars, and they're really good at scouting American talent. They've been signing every week now. They signed quality American players, and we saw the success they had with Jamal Peters, CFL All Star. I mean, he's signed with the Atlanta Falcons now. It's crazy because Peters he had literally a cup of coffee in the NFL. He signed with the Colts as an undrafted free agent out of Mississippi, and within a week he was gone. And so, which is crazy. He had an injury issue and all that. He never got another opportunity in the NFL. He goes to the CFL, becomes a major star, and now he's often getting an opportunity in the NFL. The Falcons actually have a couple different CFL players on their roster, a couple guys who made the team last year. So anyhow, but it's the Argos. It's a great run for them. I think they have a chance. I think in the past, obviously Toronto's won the most CFL championships in history, but so they're the most winningest franchise. They won the most championships. So and they're back on the mountaintop now. But the thing is with Toronto is whether or not they can sustain this. They've won championships in the past and then fallen off quickly because they've had veteran teams. They've been unable to match that hunger. So I think Michael Clemens and the Argos, they're really working towards building a championship team that's consistently great. Um, so can they keep it up? Can they do what the Bombers have done the last few years? And kind of like make that measure. You don't want to be a one and done team. One year you win the Grey Cup, the next year you're not even in the playoffs. So I think this offseason is going to be very important for them, re-signing key players. But they have a very strong front office and coaching staff to be successful moving forward. And then hopefully in the Toronto market itself, that gets recognized and they're able to draw better than they have these last several years.
I definitely agree that they look like they're going to be a perennial contender for the next couple seasons at least, if not 3 to 5 years. One of the things that I've noticed about their rosters, they've done a really good job about identifying talent from America that won't necessarily be headed back to the NFL. A guy like Sean Oakman is probably up in CFL to stay. So I thought that was a very interesting aspect of their roster building. They seem to be very good at identifying guys that are at that stage in their career.
Yeah, that's what you have to do if you're a CFL team. You have to read the tea leaves, look at the marketplace, and target players who are, for whatever reason, off the radar. You look at the Argos. I mean, their entire roster is filled with guys that NFL teams either missed on or have kind of closed the window on. You mentioned Sean Oakman, who played in the XFL in 2020. The Argos have an open mind about leagues. They signed John Allen, who's now an all-star, left tackle all-star, actually played right tackle last year. He played in the XFL as well. He'd been in the NFL for a long stretch, and they played him at tackle, where in the NFL he was kind of typecast as a guard. And then you got the Tavares McFadden's and the Robert Priesters and all these other Dwayne Hendricks, all these other players that have become starters and very good talents in the Canadian game. They've assimilated quickly there. So the Argos are very good at recognizing American talent. It's a little bit easier when you get a Chad Kelly, who did an excellent job in the Grey Cup, because that's a noticeable name. But sometimes you need to, look far and wide to find talents that have been overlooked, no matter what league they played in. And even the punter they drafted last year ended up being an all-star out of Australia. A lot of people dismiss the global process in the CFL, the global draft. They think it's just like window dressing more than anything else. But Haggerty ended up being maybe arguably the best punter in all of Canada last year. So that's another great draft pick. They have a really good front office. The big key in the CFL is recognizing Canadian talent and not just having Canadian players on their roster just because they're Canadian, but having guys who can play on an NFL level. You've seen Curly Gittins getting NFL workouts. So I mean, you want to have be able to have success in Canada, find quality Canadian talents, homegrown guys, and you want to be able to look far and wide and find and be open minded to other leagues. And we've seen that with all the American players the Argos have hit on the last 2 years that played in the XFL, the AF, etc.
Absolutely. Speaking of one of those American players they recently signed, one of my favorite FCF players, Quantez Stiggers, recently signed with the Toronto Argonauts, and thank you for bringing that to my attention, by the way. I personally think that he is one of those guys that is going to make it at this level. What's your assessment of his positioning on the roster currently?
It's going to be a difficult defensive backfield to make. So it's not easy when you're coming in as an American player because of the ratio to make it. But the Argos have shown that they're open-minded about guys on the fringe, guys they just brought in. They had guys, Tavares McFadden and Robert Priester ended up becoming starters on their team. Maurice Carnell is another very good player. A lot of ball hawking skills, like Stiggers, very similar. So I think Stiggers has an opportunity. It's good that preseason games are back. That give you more of a chance. A couple of years ago they eliminate them. So it's a deep defensive backfield. And Canada's a little bit different because you have to learn how to transition to playing at the wider field. How playing the boundary, defensive halfback. So it's a lot of different things you have to learn. Some guys adjust quicker than others. With Stiggers, he showed in the indoor game how much of a ball hawk he is, how exciting he is, how quickly he breaks on the ball. It's definitely a different style game going from the indoor game to the outdoor game. But even his college profile shows somebody who's a ball hawk, who's a very good athlete. So he's going to get a shot. Their Argos have plenty of players on their roster who have different levels of experience that have played indoor, some pro, so all that. So they're willing to look into players like that, and it's nice to see him get an opportunity. But it goes to show you how good the Argos are because they're paying attention. They're not just like picking names out of a hat. They're paying attention to the FCF. They're paying attention to all these leagues that are going out there, and they noticed him and they said, that could be an interesting guy to bring up here. Let's give him a shot. So here we are. So that's cool. That's cool. Anytime, and so that's the thing with, like, if you're playing in the FCF, if you're playing indoor football, don't assume that nobody knows you're playing there. Um, there are great organizations like Toronto that are watching closely. They're watching they're turning over every stone looking for talent, and it's good to see somebody like Stiggers get a shot.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would encourage every player to be picky with where you play, but also understand that every opportunity is giving you an opportunity to stay on the field and catch another team's eye. So definitely consider all your opportunities. With that being said, the CFL has shown a tendency to kind of sign indoor players. What is it about the indoor game that translates to the CFL so well, in your opinion?
That's a very good question. It's like difficult to pinpoint. I would say, because the fields are obviously much different, right? The indoor game and all that. But I think because you have to play defensive back differently than you would in the pro game, in the indoor game, and that's something you have to in the CFL in order to adjust out there. You have to understand the width of the field. You have wide receivers in forward motion before the snap. You have to deal with that, the timing that's involved that, and you're asked to play non-traditional defensive back positions. Like corners who come up to the CFL are often asked to not only play safety but to play defensive halfback. And so you're actually covering different parts of the field. And I think in the arena game, you're also kind of like required to cover a lot differently than you do in the States, in America, the traditional game. So that perhaps, I can't speak for all CFL teams, but perhaps they see that as as proving ground where that can actually help you transition in a CFL game, since you're playing in quarters and specific areas of the field, and you're kind of sectioning off the defense with defensive backs. I think maybe that could play into uh, CFL teams looking at indoor players and defensive backs in that field, and seeing their potential to transition well into handling that role. And so, you have these indoor players, defensive backs, that have gone into the CFL and actually transitioned well. And then you've got some guys who come from the pros and they have difficulty. Ranthony Tejada, who's in the XFL right now, was fantastic in the CFL for Montreal. Every time they started him, he played well. And for whatever reason, they would ask him to play safety or defensive halfback or maybe even the Sam position. And he was uncomfortable with that because he's a natural corner, slot corner. He didn't want to do that. So you also have to be open minded if you're an American defensive back going over to CFL, to be willing to play different positions. Some guys don't want to do it. Some guys don't want to, play a totally different style. They want to stay in their comfort zone. So, Ranthony Tejada left the CFL, asked for his release from the CFL contract, and he's in the XFL now. He's back in the XFL after starring with the Guardians in 2020. So I think there's a little bit of attitude and there's a little bit of being able to adjust and playing the pro game. So not every American defensive back can do it. Wesley Sutton has done a very good job doing that. He's with the XFL with the Guardians in 2020, and now he's become an all-star with the Alouettes. He just re-signed with them. So some guys can do it, but you need to be willing to transition, and you need to be willing to play multiple positions in the CFL. You have to adapt.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is a very key factor to being successful up there as a defensive back. So one last question for you, and we're going to transition to the NFL real briefly. What do you make of the Jets hiring Nathaniel Hackett, and how does that alter their offensive plans, potentially at quarterback for 2023?
I gotta admit, Sam, I'm like not excited. I understand, like, Nathaniel Hackett is definitely has a proven resume. There's no doubt about it. He's an experienced play caller. I can't deny his resume. He's done a good job throughout his career. It's tough what he went through in Denver. That was a complete disaster. You want to put all the blame on him, some of the blame on him. I don't know, but people expected a lot better with Russell Wilson. Maybe that's part Russell's fault. I don't know. I think Nathaniel Hackett is as good of a hire as you can get, considering Robert Sala's situation. Because I hate to say it, put it this way, but I feel like he's in a lame duck status, and it's not. I'm not trying to be negative towards Robert Sala. I think he's a great leader. I think I think he's done a decent job. It's not like, but unfortunately, he's reached a point in his coaching career with the Jets anyway, where he's got to win. And then the same goes for Joe Douglas, who might have the offensive rookie of the year and the defensive rookie of the year. He did a tremendous job with his last year's draft. Sauce Gardner is as good as it gets. Already as a rookie, he's already a top 5 corner. And then it's crazy. And then Garrett Wilson's fantastic too. He's had an excellent year. So the Jets have a lot of good young talent, but they have to start producing in the win column. And I think Robert Sala is going to have a tough time enticing coaches to join his staff when they know that a year from now, what happens if a year from now Robert Sala is fired? The entire staff goes. So, and you're looking at in the NFL situation right now where there's up to 12 offensive coordinator openings. So you're competing with a lot of NFL teams for candidates. So considering the Jets situation, which effectively, Sala and Robert Douglas and Joe Douglas, excuse me, are going into a contract year. Considering the situation, they did a good job hiring somebody who's as experienced as he is, in Nathaniel Hackett. And I give Hackett credit for taking a shot on this quickly. Sometimes these guys will take a year off and chill for a bit and then reset and come back into it. That was a pretty hard year for him in Denver. So it's all contingent upon the quarterback the Jets get. So I know the Jets are in a weird spot because they're desperate. The desperation is not always a good thing, but they're willing. I think they're at a point where they have a young enough, talented roster where they want to win immediately. And they unfortunately another flop at quarterback, whether you want to blame the kid or not, probably partially both sides. But I think the Jets are in a position now. They have the longest playoff drought in the NFL. They've gone through many, many years of irrelevance. Their owner's upset, and their coach and GM know that they have to win this year, and they have to, have a winning season, be in the playoffs, that kind of thing. And that I think they're willing to go all in on a quarterback. So whether that be an Aaron Rodgers, I don't think it's going to be Lamar Jackson. But if Baltimore wants to pick up that phone, the Jets would probably offer the sun and the moon. Why wouldn't you? I don't know if the Jets are going to take a strange path and call the Bears about Justin Fields and see what they think. But I think the Jets are desperate enough where they built their roster with good draft picks that they're willing to give up draft capital and significant salary space to add a quarterback that they feel, whether that be Carr or Rodgers or whomever, a quarterback that they feel will lead them to the playoffs. Because last year, and no disrespect to the players the Jets had, but the Jets would have made the playoffs last year if they had any level of competent quarterback play. It was amazing that they were even in the playoff hunt, to be honest. And the reason why they were in the playoff hunt was because of their defense, specifically their secondary. The DJ Reed probably had a better year than Sauce, and Sauce was off the charts. And these guys wouldn't allow catches to any receiving tandems, Hills, Waddles, whoever it was. Nobody got them. When they played Jacksonville, I remember Zay Jones the week prior killed Dallas. He had 150 yards and 3 touchdowns. The next week, Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, and I can't recall the third receiver. They combined for 4 catches against the Jets. I think for a lot, like 13 yards. So that just shows you how good their corners are. So it's just amazing. The Jets threw away an amazing. They had Super Bowl caliber defensive play, especially in their secondary, and their quarterback play was so awful that they couldn't get over the edge and make the playoffs. So I think they're desperate. That could blow up in your face. You can throw 2, 3 draft picks and everything at getting Aaron Rodgers and get him in here, and it could be a disaster. He can get hurt. He can have not mix well, but you figure with Nathaniel Hackett on board that it's a good fit. A lot of pressure on the Jets because a year from now, if they have a 6-win team or a 5-win team, even though Joe Douglas has done a very good job, Woody didn't hire them, the owner of the Jets. So I think they could be starting all over. And I think prospective offensive coordinator candidates knew that going in. They knew that, yeah, I better make it work over there. I don't know who their quarterback's going to be. So it's not, I'd rather go coach with the Rams. I'd rather be the offensive coordinator with the Rams. I'd rather be an offensive coordinator with obviously the Chargers. You already have a built in situation there with Herbert. Why wouldn't you want to go there? So the Jets OC job wasn't as sexy for them to get a qualified candidate like Nathaniel Hackett. That's a good hire. They didn't just get some run of the mill guy who has no experience whatsoever. But it's obviously not a sexy hire because of how things worked out for him in Denver. Hopefully, it works out with him for the Jets. We'll see.
Absolutely, absolutely. Great way to put that. I mean, I think that he's very competent as a play caller and an offensive coordinator, but without knowing who the quarterback is, we don't really know how this season's going to go. So, a lot of people out there speculating that this is a way to target Aaron Rodgers, but we thought that in Denver last season too. So, it'll be interesting to see exactly how everything shakes out with the Jets and their quarterback situation this offseason.
No question about it.
Definitely. Well, we touched on a lot of subjects, Mike. I really appreciate the last hour of your time. It's been a lot of fun. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and give you the rest of your day to yourself. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Sam. I'm looking forward to everything that's coming up in spring pro football, and good luck to your Eagles this weekend. It's like arguably the best weekend of the year, the conference championship. So we'll see how it goes. That matchup's going to be fascinating between the Eagles and the Niners. So thanks again, Sam, for having me on.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.